Hi, Brian. Thanks for joining me here today. It's good to talk to you.
Yeah, great seeing you again, Gene.
Yeah, we kind of fell out of touch a little bit there. Glad to be
We
back
did.
in touch with you. It's always good to hear from you. Before we
Yeah.
get going too far into the conversation, why don't you just tell people what you're doing now, currently?
Yeah, so I left Aon, I think it was back in June, really to look at different ways, really a new way to conduct IP-based lending. So Aon, if you recall, Aon IP Solution moved its IP insurance brokers and the quality of IP evaluators for mergers and acquisitions that they were doing into Aon's main business entity. And Lewis Lee, who was the CEO, formed a new entity, Moat Metrics, that does real evaluations and IP analytics. I think Aon revolutionized the IP based lending because they coupled it with the insurance offering to create a backstop to
Mm.
protect the loans against default. And unfortunately, the insurance industry got a little spooked or skittish for a variety of reasons. And the industry's really trying to rebound from that, trying to get smarter about it. And the insurance will eventually come back. But IP-based lending in and itself is not going away. It's such an important asset class. As you know, the intangible assets generally are extraordinarily valuable and critical to companies. And being able to offer such IP-based lending to growth companies seeking capital is really such a huge solution. So what I've done in June, actually it was back in March, I joined Cote Capital, and really we've got a mission of finding funding and scaling a new generation of technology companies that have these kind of breakthrough innovations or IP. So we use IP focused investment model that's really structured to be less dilutive of the ownership of these companies and their founders and produce uncorrelated returns for investors. So whereas Aon was focused on debt lending, providing debt capital, we're providing a form of equity capital. We're looking for companies that have IP that directly correlates to the company's revenue stream, just like we did at Aon, and can lay a foundation for really what we're focused on, bringing advanced manufacturing back to the U.S. And the growth companies already have an established revenue stream, a strong portfolio of IP, uh, and really an existence of having secured capital. So we've got three real prongs to the go-to-market strategy. We've got an asset-backed focus, an income-producing focus, and a scaling services focus. So first, we provide capital for scaling the company's manufacturing and operations, really to help customers meet their demand for the IP advantages in their products as they enter markets. This is all backed by their IP assets, which might include designs, patents, trade secrets, know-how, copyright,
Mm.
proprietary equipment, customer contracts, even data. We call that asset-backed. And secondly, we receive a percentage of the company's revenue, really in the form of an IP royalty or revenue share, really, to provide our investors with an annual cash yield along the way that's paid quarterly. And then we get a percentage of the future company exit. So whether they do an IPO or sale the company or whatever, that serves to buy out the royalty and leaves the equity ownership and control in the hands of the entrepreneurs that are really building it. We call that income producing. And then we provide IP managements. So we have folks to do IP management. We have technologists to help them operationally support the business to protect and optimize and scale the company's assets for future growth. And we call that scaling services. So really, we're targeting technology companies. That's our focus generally. And we're looking for high growth areas like sustainability, sustainable manufacturing, things like that.
Okay, so I have so many questions now. I mean, because
Yeah.
it sounds like it's very interesting what you're doing, and it sounds like it is a lot more owner friendly, like startup
Yes.
friendly. And
Yes.
not to say anything bad or wrong about our friends in the venture capital business, but when they come
Yes.
in, they're often given quite a lot of money, based on where the company is, and they want quite a lot of the company, oftentimes more
That's
than
right.
half, or at least half the company. So if I'm hearing
That's right.
what you're saying is this is maybe an alternative to that, as long as there
Yes.
is the ability to service the royalty payments along the way, and then they can buy you guys out
Yes.
before they go to the next round.
Absolutely. So it provides them the opportunity to grow when they need to grow versus bleeding them dry. So that way there's
Mhm.
more of a chance of a default on that loan. We want to help enable them. And that's where the services come in. So we can actually sit beside them as advisors and help them along the way to make sure that they're, really doing the right things.
Yeah, that's an interesting model. I think I mean, there should be an awful lot of interest in the startup and owner community for something like that, I would think. Um, so let me ask you this, and this may be for somebody like you who's been in this industry for so long. not to date you or anything, but you really know this. You've seen it, the good, the bad, and the ugly across the spectrum here. How do you describe to somebody the difference between the IP backed lending and the insurance? Because I
Yeah.
know, and I think I know, and what you were just talking about is how Aon got involved in both of those, but it was the insurance market that kind of scared people, not the asset backed lending part of the market. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the insurance was good for a lot of different reasons, mainly for the lender, right? So the lender comes in, a private equity firm, say, comes in and they want to, they can agree to provide access to the loans, but they are relying heavily on the insurance backstops. And the insurers are looking at the valuation, right? The insurers are saying,
Mhm.
okay, we want to make sure that we're comfortable that the company's going to survive, that their business plan is checked off, and that the value of the IP is sustainable, right? That it really is a direct correlation to that revenue stream because that's what we're insuring. We're insuring that company and we're insuring that value. So they look at it from both a going concern and a liquidation value. And that's where I think the disconnect happened because you've got a going concern value. So the company submits a business plan and over a 3 or 4 or 5 year loan period, they're saying, I'm going to produce these number of widgets. I'm going to make this amount of revenue and then, and then I'll move on. And that's the term of the loan. And so the investor comes in, okay, I've got $100 million I can throw into there, but I'm insuring in a lot of cases 100% of that, right? So the insurers looking at from an underwriting perspective, looking at that risk, and the risk is really super important. But they also look at it in a default scenario. So if the company does default for whatever reason on that loan, then the insurance kicks in, and then the investor is saying, okay, pay me. Right, because I want to be made whole. I know that the company is defaulted, but I don't care because I got the insurance. Right, so that's why, and the disconnect happened is it's really difficult to predict what that value is going to be at the end of the day. What we're doing at Cote Capital is saying, okay, we're going to look in this lens and we're going to look at the value and use components. In other words, if there's a company that we are providing a loan to that's got patents relating to semiconductors, but there are use cases beyond that. If there's companies already practicing that, that's great. Or if they're, well, I mean, it's not great, but it provides value because it shows who might be a potential acquirer for this. Or maybe it's an extension of existing technology that this company is doing that's new and different. But we provide the research looking at who might acquire these things at the end of the day. So if there is a default, there's got to be value in use. Otherwise, the value is zero. If nobody's doing it, nobody's investing in R&D in that technology space, then the value is really de minimis, and you really don't have a way to recoup your investment. And that's where the insurers really got skittish because the value was a lot less than what we had anticipated because there was no value in use. And what we're doing, Cote Capital, is saying, okay, we want that value in use proven up front, so that way we don't have that issue.
Okay. So I guess this is totally different than what some of the insurers were out there doing for a while. I don't know whether they're still doing it, but they were insuring judgments, for example,
Yes.
which struck me as just, given, and maybe we could talk about this if you want to, but given where the
Yeah.
federal circuit is right now, and there's a spot that they'll let you have that much, but they won't let you have probably 500 million or more, and you got, I think, 0% chance of keeping that verdict. And I think I saw some, Brian, that were insuring $1 billion
Yeah.
verdicts, and I thought this is going to go really ugly at some point here. So,
Well,
but
we
that's a
we
different part, right, of the sector.
that's totally different. We actually provided judgment preservation insurance, or at least we brokered that at Aon, and I think they're still doing that. You scratch your head because it's a Russian roulette kind of a thing, right? I mean, you really
Hmm.
don't know what a jury's going to decide. But in this case, the judgment's already been there, right? So the jury has said, okay, they're infringing this, and here's the award. Say it's $1 billion. But to your point, being able to preserve that judgment because the insurance doesn't pay out until the last adjudicated decision is there. So all the appeals have been exhausted. $1 billion is the number, and then it'll pay out. That takes, first of all, a long time. Anything can happen between now and then. A ton of risk, and it's really really super hard to preserve a judgment like that, like you said.
Yeah, it's. I thought that was. I mean, maybe we'll get to a place where, I mean, it shouldn't be hard, right? In an ideal
Right.
world, it should be able to figure
Absolutely.
these out. There will be some that get overturned. There will be some that stand. There'll be some big value numbers that stand, some that go away, and we're just not seeing, I think, a healthy functioning marketplace for patent litigation because of the real restriction on damages at the federal circuit, among other things.
Well, and you've got, I mean, there are some good things happening legislatively, right? You know, I love the Restore Patent
Mhm.
Rights Act of 2024, which is really aiming to remedy the weakening of what call the weakening of the patent rights following eBay. And it's really providing a legal right of a patent owner to a rebuttable presumption of injunctive relief upon finding of infringement of the exclusive right that's been granted by a patent. I mean, the Constitution really really tried to enable that, or at least thought this is what we want to do for the country, is allow this exclusive right granted by a patent. And that's what I think the Right Act is designed to do. So I think that may help from a damages perspective come a long way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think it's hilarious that you can get an exclusive right granted by the government,
Yeah.
and you don't have the right to exclude once you prove that the person has taken it from you. Once there's all their defenses have fallen away, once
Yeah.
the patent has been confirmed valid, and suddenly this exclusive right becomes non-exclusive, and it's bizarre on so many different levels. And I I think the Restore Act is going to be, I think, a hard lift. Um,
Yes, I
because
agree.
I heard I had been hearing that the people who didn't like it were saying, "Oh, well, this is just going to codify eBay," and it's like, well, no,
Oh,
that's
no
not what
way. Yeah.
it's not what it's supposed to do. But then I will tell you, when I went and I looked at it, I kind of saw their perspective. So what they're trying to do is get back to where we were before eBay, which was not that you would get an
Yes.
automatic injunction, but that you had
Yes.
this strong presumption of an injunction.
Yes.
And then the
Yeah,
other
and
side, but
it places the burden on the infringer to demonstrate that a permanent injunction is not warranted. That's where it belongs.
right, no, I agree with that. But do you think that that's going to change the way judges analyze this stuff? And because
It's
that's really the question. So what I was thinking is if there's a concern that they're still going to apply the equity standards, which I think is in the act, which makes some sense, so that you're not doing stupid stuff, right?
yes,
Like if
yes,
there's a global pandemic, we want people to infringe to save the planet, as we just coming off of one, right? But
yeah,
I think that harm should be irrebuttably presumed.
yes.
I mean, this is not a situation where if you're going to allow infringement for a decade, which often happens while you're waiting for these cases, that comes with no consequence. That's a great consequence that you can't compensate the owner for.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I think this act is really gonna, I hope, restore the viability of the patent system as an instrument to protect this innovation and hopefully facilitate the financing and monetization of the transfer of technology. So I mean, there's a lot of benefits to this, but to your point, I'm just not sure. I hope it gets the legs that it needs, but we need somebody strong in the patent office. So, I mean, that's another question is who's going to take over, but I think it really has to happen.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about that? The patent office,
I
who's
have a lot
next?
of
Who may
thoughts
be
on that.
next?
I think one guy that or a person profile should not be somebody from big tech, because I think it's a mistake. The FCC Commissioner Carr, he's publicly stated that big tech's going to be investigated during a second Trump term. He's already said that. So it's going to be really stupid to have the FCC go after big tech at the same time the USPTO is turning it over to a big tech guy. So selecting somebody from them, I think, really means status quo and is not going to allow America to really rise to the challenge of competing against China in areas like AI. And they've also been big tech's been supporters of both Biden and Obama administrations. So it's really hard to imagine that Trump's going to favor big tech for this kind of job. 18 out of the top 20 petitioners challenging patents at the PTAB are from big tech. So you're getting Apple and Samsung and Google and Microsoft, Intel and Cisco. They're among the top 10 most active challengers. So it seems anyone who's closely associated with AIA that really created the PTAB is not going to be the right choice. So I think what we do need is we need a patent attorney that's intimately familiar with at least some aspects of the patent system, whether that be through experience representing patent owners in trying to litigate the patents or patent challenges at the PTAB, or somebody that really knows the patent acquisition system. We need somebody that really has advised patent owners and real innovators and is really going to encourage more innovation in areas like artificial intelligence. That should be a mandatory prerequisite.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you any more. Um, I just don't see this being a big tech. You know, you look at all of
Yeah.
President-elect Trump's now appointments, and these people do not, whether you like them or you don't like them, they do not scream uh, status quo. These are people
Right.
that are going to change things
Exactly.
up, shake things up, and big tech. I mean, particularly if you pick one of the, you know, the Apple, Google, Intel, Microsoft, Cisco crowd that is such heavy users of the PTAB. I mean, I suppose they might change things up and then even put their foot down on the PTAB accelerator even more, but that
Oh,
can't be
yeah.
the right answer. I mean, you know, I get into some arguments with people about what the PTAB stats show. If you really look at what they show, is they show that if you get a final decision, you have almost no chance of winning. That's what they show,
Yes,
and
that's right.
and and that was never the case in district court. When you had federal judges hearing these, you had about 30% of patents that were challenged that would go down, and now it's 85% of the patents that get all the way to a decision have at least one claim. They're defective, you know, and 70% of them lose all the claims. I mean, this is just the shooting gallery.
Yeah, I mean, a patent was always said to be presumed valid by law, but the act, the AIA for that created the PTAB is basically looking at it. Okay, now we're going to review it for a second time, the validity of a patent usually before the proceeding with any infringement case in a lot of cases. So I mean, it's just really it goes against what we've really are all about in the U.S.
Yeah. Do you have any thought? I mean, Prevail moved in the Senate, at least is out of the committee now, and it's now at the full Senate level. There's not enough time for it to get enacted. And even if it did get passed, the House doesn't have a companion that's anywhere near close.
That's right.
So we're really continuing to set this up for the next Congress. But do you have a
That's
thought
right.
on that or on para, which still didn't even quite make it that far? There's still a lot of resistance there against the eligibility reform.
Yeah, I think I mean it once again, you've said it. I really don't know what's going to happen in this next administration. It's going to be difficult, I think, to get anything done, at least initially. But the appointees that Trump makes, and maybe that will help to gather momentum, because I really don't think it's going to be a status quo type of administration. We've already seen that with the dialogue that's come across and some of the choices that he's made. But with respect to patents, I think a lot of it's going to revolve around the Secretary of Commerce and the USPTO Director, and in being able to help to, I guess, create the right momentum, which hopefully will trickle over to Congress and trickle over to the other administrators to make the right decisions.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch, right? Because the the nominee for Secretary of Commerce, what
Yeah.
I've heard about him is he's a patent owner himself, from what I
Yes,
understand, and that
absolutely.
he a firm believer in the patent system, and like most patent owners, not particularly fond of the PTAB. As a matter of fact, I've heard he doesn't like the
Right.
PTAB at all. But then on the
Yes.
other side, you have Elon Musk, who has
Yeah.
said some things against patents, you know, and frankly, I think Elon is right. Elon has said patents are for the weak. Yes, they
Yeah.
are. When you're the biggest company in the world, like Apple or a Google, you don't need patents. What
Yeah.
what you need patents for is to get an opportunity to compete
That's
against the big players, to get investment.
exactly. Yeah, because he's,
So
I mean, you might say what you like about Elon Musk. I think his stance on patents, as you said, is very clear. But on the other hand, I think he's also saying, as you said as well, that the small companies is what he's all about. He's made it on some of the podcasts on Joe Rogan and some of these others that he stated that he's backing these smaller companies to try and protect their innovation. So it's there's a lot going on. The commerce director, I do like the pick that he chose. The former CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald. I think he's a great choice, and I think he's a patent owner, like you said, and he is pro innovation.
Yeah, that's what that's what we need. I think if you look at just the last 20 years at the patent office, so much of that time has been spent with somebody from big tech involved.
Yes.
And I don't, some people will say, oh, well, they're on the take or you're not on the take. I mean, if you spend your career in big tech, working for Microsoft or working for Google, you start, that's the way you see the world. You
Yes.
don't have to say that these people are on the take to say that, well, they're kind of been siloed for so long. They maybe are, drinking the Kool-Aid, and don't see the forest for the trees.
I think, and I think maybe Dave Kapos might be an exception. Dave is a very dear friend of mine, and we worked closely together at IBM. I think he was a very effective USPTO director. Andre Yanku as well. I thought he was very, very effective. But, some of the others, I think you're absolutely correct. There's they're thinking in their right ear on behalf of big tech, and as you know, there's a ton of lobbyists and a ton of money being directed by that contingent in Washington because they have the money to do it, to push their agenda, and the USPTO director in some cases, will listen to that and perhaps have an influence over those decisions.
Yeah, and policy starts with people. So we probably won't have a really great idea until we know who the nominee is for the patent office.
Yes.
And then that'll give us a lot of clues, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
So as an investor, I guess you call yourself an investor, right? You're investing in companies, whether it's through insurance or otherwise. I mean, you're trying to give them financial solutions that allow them to continue to do what they want to do. So from your money man perspective, what do you think is the right resume or CV for the next director? We've talked about not big tech, but who? Or if not
somebody,
a particular person, what qualities or experiences? I mean, you talked about somebody who's advised a patent owner, but what else do you think is going to make an effective leader?
I think it would be great to have somebody that's actually been through it. So maybe somebody that's an innovator himself. So he's a patent attorney that's very experienced in seeing all different aspects of the law, right? So maybe they've got a lot of different. They're intimately familiar with a lot of the aspects of the patent system. Perhaps they've been through representing patent owners in patent litigation, or they've experienced patent challenges at the PTAB. Somebody that really knows the system, but they're also an innovator themselves. Maybe they've got patents and they know first of all, how challenging it is to get a patent and keep the patent. Perhaps maybe they've experienced the PTAB in a negative way, or at least seeing the difficulties that might provide. They're a real innovator and they actually have that perspective coming in. So they know both ends of the spectrum. They know that the big tech, has a certain way of thinking, and they can appreciate that. Maybe they've been in big tech at some point, and they can also appreciate, more importantly, the innovator's perspective. And that's really what we're trying to get somebody in there to really, that they've not only advised patent owners, but they really have looked at innovation and they've advised on innovation, or they've been an innovator themselves. I think that's really somebody to promote the virtues of innovation. That's really what we need.
Yeah. And you have mentioned a couple of times now that what we need is a patent attorney. And I always just like to point out, sometimes people will say, oh, that's the last thing we need. We don't need an attorney. We don't need a patent attorney. Well, the statute actually sort of requires it. You don't necessarily maybe have to be a patent attorney with a registration number, but the statute requires that particular job to go to somebody within the industry who understands the substance of the industry.
Yes, that's right.
And that's different than a lot of other appointments.
Yeah, patents are a unique animal, and you have to have the experience in having looked and being able to evaluate patent claims, right? The broadness or the narrowness of claims, and looking at a lot of the rules around that, and what gets patented, what should be patented, what should not be patented. All that, because you're having an army of people including patent examiners that are going to report to you. And being able to have the experience to direct them or guide them on certain ways of doing business is essential, I think.
Mhm. So what do you think, if you had to look into your crystal ball and make a prediction, what do you think the future is for, say, asset-backed financing? Is that really a function of who is the director or the litigation climate, or what is it a function of, number one? And number two, what do you think moving into 2025? Are you bullish or bearish?
I'm very bullish. I'm not sure that it's as much of a a result of who's in office or who's in the USPTO. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think it has to do with the whole lending environment and innovators out there that and the sources and the uses of capital, right? So I mean, there's lots and lots of great innovators out there, growth companies, right? Really good technology growth companies that have a lot of innovation that they've already invested in. And as you know, with a startup, it's hard to invest because it costs money to patent. And so you've got important areas like trade secrets that are equally as valuable, but you have to determine that value. So it's going to, I think the reason I'm bullish is because I think there's a broad spectrum of opportunity for firms like ours, for instance, to go in, and find these growth companies, being able to identify the capital, the right capital, because there are investors out there that can appreciate this. And you're looking for specialty lenders, ones that are beyond the traditional VCs or even the PE environment that go out and they fund, because they're looking to fund companies that they're more focused on the revenue portion and looking at the business plan. We're focused on looking and making that direct connection between IP and the revenue stream, and that's where the specialty arms or the specialty legs of these different investors, that's the ones we're attracting to, because they can appreciate what that brings, because we can determine what that value of the IP is, and that can be used as a real source of of a reason to provide that capital, right? You can provide that as collateral to obtain these loans. And so I think there's lots of opportunity to do that. I think the insurance will come back. And, so I'm very bullish on that. We can wait, right? I mean, we're not the kind of loans that we're providing are going to be without insurance. But at some point in the future, sure, I'd like to entertain that again. And I think we can educate the insurers again that there's a different there's some different folks in town that think about it a different way, the way Aon did and others. And I think that there's lots of opportunities to provide this where you're not raping and pillaging these small startups that are trying to make money, and you're coming in and taking, providing a huge portion that you're demanding as a return on that investment. We don't want that. And I think there are other investors out there that don't want that either. We don't want to provide the traditional debt capital or even the straight equity capital that'll, you sell your souls to the devil for 40% of your company you're giving up to get this capital. You don't want to do that to these companies. It's just going to cause them a lot of angst, and it won't allow them to grow the way that they need to grow.
Right. How do you even start to value this, though? I mean, there's a couple of thoughts that pop into my head. Is one, it strikes me as really odd how intangible assets are carried or accounted for, or not accounted at all, it sometimes seems, on the books of a company.
Yeah.
It's almost like they don't exist unless and until you go to sell them. And we know that that's not true. I mean, and then they get treated sometimes like they're a negative value rather than a positive value because you have to pay to keep maintaining them.
Yep.
And then I have in my head the other thing too is what impact does this never-ending battle to fight in the forum of your choice have on deciding what the value is? I mean, if you get to fight in the Eastern District of Texas, for example, you as a patent owner have a chance. Most people think, oh, it's a patent owner friendly jurisdiction. No, if you look at the numbers, it's slightly defendant oriented, but very slight. I mean, it's pretty close to 50-50. But you go to some courts, like Northern California, for example, and the patent owner really has almost no chance. And not no chance, it's like no chance to even get started, because you're going to lose a lot of these cases on a motion to dismiss. So how does that factor in the difficulty in figuring out what these things really are on a spreadsheet in an accounting way, and then the reality of forum shopping? I mean, how does that factor into what you
Yes. So
do?
the first part of it, even what we tried to do at Aon, because IP we tried to establish as a separate asset class, which is an increasingly hard thing to do. And so we went to one of the things we did was go to the credit agencies, because as you can imagine, the S&P and the when they do a credit rating of a company, they consider a lot of different factors, and we tried to instill in them one of the main things we tried to instill in was try and add the IP component to that. So you're looking at when they're doing the credit rating of a company, you want to provide the value of the intellectual property as an input to that. So as the analysts, the credit analysts are going out and looking at the credit worthiness of a company, you can consider what that value of the IP is that's set apart from the property, plant, and equipment value and some of these other aspects. It could be a game changer. We were starting with that education. Unfortunately, we didn't get there, but that's something I think that should be considered, and that would go a long ways to creating this IP as a separate asset class. Because if you have a public company that has to quarterly report what that changing value of that IP is over time, there's going to be a heck of a lot more emphasis on generating that IP and also maintaining the value and making sure that is growing over time. So that, if it's becoming a requirement for these companies, then determining the value and making sure you're sustaining it is going to be actually important. The second part of your question, which is really the forum shopping, yeah, it's become that part of a system. I'm here in Texas, in Houston. The Eastern District is very close to me. The Western District of Texas also is becoming very, very hot in El Paso and jurisdictions like that. And you're absolutely right. Going to California or even to New York and some of these other jurisdictions, depending on the history of the way that these cases have been adjudicated is difficult. And so what you're seeing is a whole lobbying effort of big tech and others to push for some of those jurisdictions because they do think they have a better chance. I think over time that will certainly be, hopefully will even out such that it will be it won't so much be form shopping, because every form ideally should be the same, right? Decisions should be really transparent and consistent across all of these different jurisdictions such that you won't have that form shopping. But a lot of it does depend on that value. And unfortunately, some of these innovators are struggling with that because they don't have the resources to really throw these, to defend these cases. And what you're seeing is a lot of this, I guess what they're calling efficient infringement or predatory infringement, which is very sad, but it all relies on an innovator's ability to prove his case, and it's becoming very difficult.
It is becoming increasingly difficult, and one of the things, and since you brought up efficient infringement, and on the other side of that are the patent trolls, the
Yes.
people who are just, and they're bad actors on both sides, and it shouldn't shock anybody that that's the case. That's throughout life, and they're bad patent owners too. But I think that narrative has just always been overblown. But
Yes.
the question that I have is, it seems to me that people, rightly or wrongly, look at it different when it is the innovator who got the patent, who's
right.
going after somebody. And maybe also, I think if it is, the company didn't work out, but it's the investor who the patents have fallen to the investor who invested the money, then there's a nexus there where I think it falls apart for a lot of people is when the original investor, the original innovator is not there. Somebody swoops in, buys patents, and then it feels a lot more like it's a tax on innovators, not because that person's done anything other than been in the right place at the right time and has a risk tolerance that allows them to buy these and sue. And I wonder, I mean, I know why the property has to be right, because that's the way that investors get their money back, is by selling these things. But how does that factor into your decision on value, knowing that if you were to sell this downstream to somebody who is quote unquote a patent troll, that person's now going to have an enormous difficulty with these assets. So they must be worth less to them, and worth less to everybody. And it seems like every decision winds up being like dominoes pushing down, like another brick on the barge, right? It just weighs it down, weighs it down, weighs it down. How do you account for that?
Well, I think you and I actually had this recent discussion on looking at, for instance, injunctions, right? So looking at the whole NPE environment. So you're looking at, and when I say NPE, non-practicing entity, I think of companies that are out there just acquiring and amassing portfolios and then suing, right? So it was the former intellectual ventures model when they were out there buying everything, which changed. But there are still entities out there that do this, and they use the portfolios just as ammunition to go out and attack, right? And they're taking advantage of that. But the innovator himself, right? So the guy that's out there creating the innovation, and he can't, unfortunately, doesn't have the capital to make it, or maybe he's tried but he doesn't have the capital to set up a manufacturing operation. It's a great innovation. It's a tremendous breakthrough in technology that would be a game changer, but he just doesn't have the resources to do it, can't get the investors to buy it. And so then lo and behold, somebody out there is going out there and says, hey, I'll give you $1 million for these innovations, which might be, well, it is less than what is really worth, because it's worth a lot if it was to actually be practiced in the world and actually selling widgets or services, which will never see the light of day if it gets sold to these NPEs. So I think there is a value component there, and it does degrade that value because that value will never be realized, because it's only being used in a certain set of circumstances where a guy's going to buy the patents and he's going to go out and find infringers and go out and assert those, and he will obtain a value through a settlement value or litigation value, right? Versus the operational value of going out. This could be $1 billion company if this guy only had the resources and the capital to make it big. And unfortunately, what you're seeing is a lot of these companies can't do it. So you're right. There is a value component it's really sad.
It is. And I think that's why the litigation funding is so critically important,
Yes.
because it does allow for the owner of the asset to stay in
Yes.
the loop. You get a little bit, usually, contingency representation from the firm, or maybe they're doing a hybrid situation, and then you get a funder. So you essentially have three people at the table: the original innovator, the law firm, and the investor.
Yes.
And the infringers don't like that. And I again understand there are bad actors on both sides. I don't understand what IP Edge did in Delaware. I mean, I understand
Right.
what they did. I don't understand why they did it,
Right.
but they did. So they're a bad actor, at least for that decision. They made a bad decision, but that doesn't mean that this whole industry. And you just hear just ridiculous claims. I mean, these are not people that are throwing money around. I mean, these are wise investment analysts making these decisions. They're not backing crappy cases.
That's right. Exactly.
At least in my experience.
Yeah, I think lit funding has
So
definitely changed the game. I think there are a lot of and there are a lot of really smart lit funders out there, and they're picky, and they should be, right? They're not going to throw bad money at good money at bad money. So I mean, it's just there are bad situations that they would ordinarily say no to, but they're looking and filtering and finding those hidden nuggets, and the innovators. It is an opportunity for that innovator to really share in those proceeds, right? So it has changed the game.
yes, it certainly has, and hopefully it'll continue to change it for the better. But I appreciate that you think next year is going to be a good year, and you're not bearish about this. I
Yeah.
don't know anymore. I just don't know. I mean, I want to be excited every year. Every year I hope that the
Yeah.
next year is going to be better. And maybe this time there's a little bit of difference, because depending upon who President Trump puts in the patent office, we will maybe get more of a cheerleader that's pro-innovation. And I think that could go a long way
Yeah.
for setting the tone. Because I do think, and maybe you could comment on this, I do think a big piece of the problem the industry has faced is just never-ending criticism in the popular press and from our politicians about the patent system. And nobody wants to be an innovator anymore. Why would you? Because you're blamed for everything.
That's right. Yeah, and you're right. There's a lot of media attention to it, a lot of misleading information and incorrect information out there. And, I don't know what people believe. Hopefully, and I am hopeful that the right dialogue will occur if the right person is there to share that message directly. So maybe that'll change that spectrum a bit. But yeah, I am hopeful.
Good, good. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to
Absolutely.
chat with me here today. This has been great. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with? Any thoughts about whether it be the industry or about next year or predictions? I'll give you an opportunity to wrap up.
Yeah, I think it's a different world that we live in now versus 30 years ago when I was starting into this business. And it was to a large extent a lot easier to do things, right? Perhaps easier to obtain a patent, certainly to maintain a patent, um, and also to go out and license, right? I mean, I was making a ton of money in licensing at companies like Westinghouse and IBM and InterDigital and Verizon and other companies that I've led the IP organizations in. But now it's a different world, and there's lots of things happening, like this whole predatory infringement, and large companies using patented IP of innovators and their startups without permission and passing the problem off to their attorneys because it's more efficient, and the poor innovator doesn't have the money to really defend himself. It's a difficult environment, and I am hopeful. I think the world hopefully will change. Balance will be returned. Innovation will be pro innovation again, and our patent system can straighten itself out. The PTAB can. I don't know as if doing away with the PTAB is the right decision, but I think certainly aligning it with the right priorities, I think, is a necessity for the new USPTO director, hopefully, to come in and really make sense of all this mess. But yeah, I am hopeful. Thank you, Gene.
Well, good. Well said, Brian. I really appreciate it. It's always good to see you. And
Absolutely.
let's not be a stranger. Let's stay in touch, and hopefully we'll get you to one of our programs in 2025.
Oh, I'll definitely be there for your main event. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Brian, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Gene. Bye bye.